Did you know that the number one use of AI right now isn't on how to be more productive or things for your business, anything like that? It's therapy. People are using AI as their own online therapist. So if this sounds like you or you're interested in this clip is for you because I'm interviewing one of the top people in the field around this today, Dr. Marlynn Wei, MD. She is a Harvard and Yale-trained psychiatrist, and she has a psychotherapy practice based in New York City, where she helps high-achieving individuals, including professionals, leaders, execs, entrepreneurs. You can imagine there might be a few of those in New York City. We were talking about her perspective on the use of AI for therapy. I apologize for the abrupt start of this interview. We had some technical issues, and so the first few moments of this interview did get cut off. But she was expanding on how this tool can be useful in serving people who are in difficult situations, including war zones. That AI can be useful for people stuck in war zones such as Ukraine. I cite some data that's come in, very preliminary at this point, on the effectiveness of AI for psychotherapy. Enjoy.
On people. And so some of the latest research just in the last few months have come out. One example is that in Ukraine, actually, they did a study for helping women who are in these kind of war zones in Ukraine, and they were able to compare AI therapy support with in-person and online therapy with psychologists. And they found that the 24-hour kind of access to AI was supportive. It did reduce anxiety, but the therapist was able to reduce anxiety a little bit more. But the way we're trying to think about it now is not replacing therapists, but really as an adjunct, as a combination support outside of hours, because obviously a therapist can't be available 24/7.
I love this because I think that's a distinction everyone is trying to articulate more, even in business. AI shouldn't replace everybody. It's supposed to augment people, but I think everyone's still struggling, like, what does that mean? And I know in the coaching areas, especially in business coaching, personal development coaching, and psychiatry, therapy, people are grappling with the same thing and using it in a different way, of course. I've used it for myself. I'm going to use myself as a test case. There's plenty for me to work on. And I did find it helpful. And I was also aware there has to be some distinction between what an AI chatbot could do for mental health and what it's not as good at. So that we don't think they're the same or one is just a cheaper version of the other. Tell us what the research is telling us about this technology for Ukraine, people in war-torn areas, and how this tool can be useful for mental health.
I think that AI can be very useful for different modalities of psychotherapy. So cognitive behavioral therapy, which is very structured, and also motivational interviewing. So we know that there are structured types of therapy that are really effective through the delivery of chatbots. So those types of therapy, but what AI at this point is not as good at is the area of relational therapy. So I specialize in psychodynamic therapy, and a lot of that type of therapy involves you being humans together. And so right now, AI can't necessarily do that at this point. It's really different because it is programmed, it is trained to provide answers, most of them. But often, like if someone asks me in therapy as a psychodynamic therapist, I'm not really there to just provide direct answers or direction. I'm really there to help someone discover that and be with them in co-creating this experience together as humans. So I think at this point, it's just pretty different what AI can do and what a human therapist could do.
I love that distinction because right now, you're absolutely right. People are treating Chat GPT as a Q&A. Like I enter a question, like Google, I enter a question, I get an answer. But therapy is not about someone telling you an answer, is it? It's about your own inner exploration. And so I can see how people might, because as a coach, or people ask, what should I do? What should I do? Like they're looking for an answer. And yet in leadership development, that would be counterproductive for someone else or some other thing to tell me what I should do.
Right.
And I don't know if the public understands that distinction yet, because AI, as far as my experience, it mimicked a real person pretty well. It knew what to say because I'm an AI consultant. I knew what it was doing. It can imitate, it can replicate, it can mimic, it can simulate, but there's not actually a human there. And I can see how in certain situations that might not be the best solution. Tell me about this, because I know this is something that people are worried about.
So OpenAI did a recent study. They actually did a randomized controlled trial a few months ago that the results were published, and they looked at, over the course of 28 days, they looked at about nearly 1,000 users, and they put them in different situations. And they found that a few things. They found that if you use voice mode, for most people, that creates more of an emotional experience. But
Really?
they also found people who were predisposed to using voice mode, people who wanted to use voice mode, they tend to be a little bit already selecting themselves, expecting more of an emotional engagement with AI. They also found that the more vulnerable people, so more emotionally vulnerable people who are lonely at the beginning, that can actually worsen their state, engaging too much in terms of heavy usage and relying on ChatGPT on the voice mode. So I think that there are certain vulnerabilities that could worsen the loneliness, and that's something to look out for.
We are a culture of a lot of lonely people. A lot of people are lonely in a crowd right now. It's just a state of where we're living in. And now comes along this tool that can mimic a good friend. I can unload, I can vent, and it's always programmed to be positive and uplifting. And I was very struck by one of your writings. You talked about we've heard about artificial intelligence, but what you talked about was artificial empathy. And I found that phrase so fascinating because that's what's going on, isn't it?
Yes, and our mind reads the same thing. What was interesting is that we actually can read what it gives us as empathy. And it can be healing in that respect, that people are actually absorbing it, even though we know that it's not from an actual human, that you can still absorb the compassion. So I think in that way, it can be positive, because sometimes people have difficulty, especially if there's like trauma background, with absorbing that kind of empathy. So maybe it's a safe structure in which they can begin to learn how to absorb that compassion. And so I do think there's some positive things AI can do in terms of cultivating that, as long as it doesn't go into the worsening of loneliness and socialization. If people are emotionally dependent on AI, I think that's a little bit different. But I think in terms of cultivating and being able to absorb, learning how to be more self-compassionate, having that repeated reminder, I think those are positive things that it could be useful for.
I think for me, what has been useful, because like I said, I got plenty to work on. I found that the AI was a good training ground. It was like an incubator. Before I have a tough conversation with a human that might just blast my nerves, I'm doing a rehearsal or a run through. And that experience actually helped my nerves stabilize a bit. To go from
Yes.
me being a hot mess to working on myself in my head silently to talking to somebody, for me, has always been a big jump. And I was aware, okay, just me venting to AI is not really therapy, but it did seem to stabilize me a bit so that I had enough to have the rough conversation.
That's a
So,
great use of it, because there's actually a technique in therapy called imagery rehearsal. And so a lot of pro athletes use it. It's for performance anxiety. And so you can actually go through every detail of potential plays or conversations in your mind to enhance the success. So I could see that as being a really great use. You use the AI as a way to optimize and practice different
mhm.
ways that conversations could go. And I think that could be a useful tool for people.
I'm for whatever's useful. And like anything, sometimes it's a vitamin, sometimes it might be a little bit toxic. It depends on the dosage, depends on the situation.
Yes. I will say one of the things I found in my own private practice, talking with people who are using AI as sort of adjunct support outside of sessions, is that sometimes at this point, the chat GPT will give them recommendations on dating advice and certain things, like very specific things to do. And it is sometimes a little bit off in terms of what it's recommending. And so we'll catch that in session. Like we'll talk about, oh, okay, this is like what I was thinking. I was like, let's just think about this through together a little bit. Like, how do you feel about it? Does that seem like the right recommendation for you? So I think this still falls short in certain areas so far.
Well, you're working with some of the most stressed people on the planet in Manhattan. I imagine you're working with people under a lot of pressure. I'm excited to see that you're encouraging them to take advantage of this tool, yet inviting them to bring in their thoughts. And let's vet what you got out of AI.
I think that's really important. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Because I think also what has not yet been studied, and I'm very interested to see how this will change, is that traditionally in therapy, you don't usually have two therapists, right? So I think that especially in psychodynamic therapy, it's unusual to have multiple therapists because it dilutes the whole process a little bit. Certain types of therapy can be compatible together, but I think that one of the things I'm curious to see is as AI therapy grows and people are also doing in-person therapy, how will it impact the relationship? Because what if AI says, hey, I think that you should do this, and then the therapist is trying to help you and it's moving in a different direction?
I can imagine chat's great for more cognitive stuff. CBT, what are you thinking? I'm thinking this. But when it comes to relational, that's the part that I hesitate on because in my experience, there's so much power in being seen. And I don't mean just in an abstract way, the chat knows me, but like a human eyeball to eyeball, like we are animals. And we were designed to read body language and breathe air and actually look into each other's eyes. I don't know if that experience will ever be duplicated through an AI, or what do you think around this?
I do think that there will still be a role for human therapists. I think that part of the appeal of AI is its availability and its scalability. So I think there are things that could be useful for, especially in areas that are under-resourced. And so I think AI can help supplement that. But I do think that the human therapy aspect, especially relational therapy, also the types of therapy I do, experiential therapies, things like IFS. So there's different types of therapy that being able to have a human there with you through the process is really important.
I'm sure I could get ChatGPT to talk me through an IFS session. It would know the questions to ask. What part of you feels this? What part of you feels that? And it would be interesting to compare an AI IFS session. The bot knows how to do that versus a human. And it's interesting what you said. You can't have two therapists. It is confusing.
Right. What will happen then? And particularly if you're developing, over time a relationship and you're used to doing that with AI versus a human. Because I do see people, a good percentage of the people I work with have difficulty in social situations. And so the AI may take you so far, but I think having a human therapist help you navigate this and interpret it live, it's a different type of thing. But we don't know. This is research that's new territory.
Yeah, we need more data. And the AI is moving ahead so quickly. I know just a few months ago, talking to AI, there was a delay. Like you'd have to wait. And now, it's speeding up. It's much more nuanced. I think in the beginning, I spoke to some therapists that, oh, it'll never replace real therapy. Because at the time it was clunky. But now I was really excited to hear what you mentioned about people in Ukraine or in war-torn areas. So they just got on their computers and talked about being in a bomb shelter and the stress, or I'm curious.
They had access. Yes. So have some of the people, they had access to what they called an AI friend, where they could chat with through difficult situations. And this was over 8 weeks. And they compared that to people who were seeing a therapist 3 times a week. And they did find that with AI, you were able to reduce the anxiety about 35%. And with human therapists, you were able to reduce the anxiety 50%. So the human therapist was still better, but the AI was helpful in reducing the anxiety. So both were effective, but there was still a little bit added benefit to having human therapy.
And did the study catch people that were doing both?
It was a specific trial designed for this. So I don't know that they put people in both situations. I think they may have added it. They may have added it cumulatively. I have to go back and look. But I think there was there was another study at Dartmouth. And I think a big question here is, what tool are you using? Because in Dartmouth, they trained a Thera-bot. They called it Thera-bot. So they specifically trained a chatbot with professional guidance, with mental health professional guidance. And so this is different than using a general LLM like ChatGPT. It was specifically a Thera-bot. And they were able to find that with that, you were able to reduce, they looked at 3 different categories: people with major depression, generalized anxiety disorder, and eating disorders. And they were able to find that with the use of this Thera-bot, you could decrease the depression symptoms about 50%. You could decrease anxiety 30%, and you were able to decrease body image issues and eating disorder symptoms by 20%, close to 20%. So it was effective, but it's not yet commercially available. It was a research study.
The public doesn't know there are different models. You might know the difference between Claude and Chat, but even within ChatGPT, which version are you using? 4.1 or 4. All these different versions. How did this Therabot, how was it more effective than regular ChatGPT? Just because regular ChatGPT searches everything that's ever been printed. And I imagine.
Oh, yes. This was trained
Thera-bot.
specifically by professionals. And so it was also monitored by professionals. One of the important things is to think about if there are structures within the system that you're using to escalate and know how to flag it to here you should really talk to someone. This is a big issue. Because there are these AI companions, and there's a case of a Character.AI was one of the cases where there was a teen who was using a character from Game of Thrones. And unfortunately, because of that, we don't know if it was because of that interaction, but prior to this teen's death by suicide, he had been interacting with this Character.AI, and that was
I think I
a
read
terrible
about
outcome.
Pretty awful. And you think about teens, they're so vulnerable and they live on their phones. And my gosh, you can just feel the intensity of that adolescent connection. Someone gets me, and then but you're engaging with a character you programmed to be a certain way. Also, there's cases of people literally falling in love with their chatbots. They have a romantic attachment, serious romantic attachment to their chatbot. And then let's say the chatbot goes down, like it went offline. These folks are really upset.
Those are cases of severe or more intense emotional dependence. And so it does, I think, leave some vulnerabilities. For people who are using it that way.
And I think this is good for parents to be aware of. I'm very curious about where we're going with this technology as people.
Yeah, I think platforms are taking it seriously, have some kind of responsibility to make sure that if people are using it in that way, how to have it escalate and flagged if they're in more severe distress, because they may have. It may not even just be that the AI is telling them to do anything harmful, but it may just be that someone is divulging that they're in a serious situation that could use professional human help.
I even looked at some of the Reddit threads and Quora, and they're massive threads of users claiming that they felt more supported and more seen and more understood by ChatGPT than any therapist ever. And I was astounded. Like, I'm glad it was helpful, but wow. What do you think of that? That people feel more understood from a chatbot than a human?
I think that is very possible. And I think that's important data for us as therapists to take into consideration. So I think that can be healing. I think the question is, does it replace therapy? We don't know the long-term studies yet. So right now, I think that you can have that initial feeling seen. So in therapy, we talk about empathy is necessary for the beginning of treatment, but it's not, if that's only empathy, you're always going to be in therapy. You don't ever graduate out of therapy. So a lot of what I do also is not just empathy, not just supportive therapy, but something that is a little bit more challenging sometimes for people.
Yeah,
And
people
so
need
trying
challenge to grow also.
So I think
I was talking to a coach. She was very anti-AI, which is fine. But she said it makes people addicted. People go on there and they vent and vent and vent. They feel sorry for themselves. They're feeling a victim, and that's not useful. So she's thinking we don't want people just sitting there venting all the time. From my perspective, if people need to vent, it's because they haven't vented enough. And everyone around them is just sick of hearing about it. Something needs to be told over and over until at some point you're done. That loop never finishes. It's always nagging at people. I don't know. I'm curious your perspective.
Yeah. So if this were happening with a therapist, and I would be curious to see like what AI would do in terms of if they felt like this person was repeatedly venting about the same thing. But in therapy, what we would do is actually not just only support that, but also titrate in a little bit of awareness of okay, this is interesting. This is the fact that we keep coming back to. This is something you have known about and you continue to feel stuck in this pattern. And what can we do about the fact that there's this pattern that keeps going on? So I imagine that part of it is the disruption of that cycle. Because if we think about it neurologically, when you vent, about something, you are repeating a specific perspective. And then if you continue to do that over and over, you're actually enhancing the repetition cycle in the brain, and you're enhancing these neural pathways that continue to feel. So for example, if someone feels really helpless and feel like they are, no matter whatever they do, nothing works. And if you continue to just amplify that, that can actually produce a downward spiral and people can remain entrenched in it. So venting alone, without kind of professional intervention, could potentially lock in these kind of and consolidate these pathways rather than disrupt them. So part of what therapy tries to do, and I think if I were training an AI system or model, I would want it to be doing this, is to identify when these kind of repeated patterns are happening and just find ways to empathically disrupt them and get the person on board to disrupt them too.
And I think that what you just said, empathically, is so important, because sometimes well-intentioned people in real life are sick of hearing about it. And there's this tough love attitude, like, you just need to, and that never works. So the empathic, gosh, I know that was horrible what happened to you when you were 5. And that has to be held first. And I feel like ChatGPT is able to do that more than us limited humans at times, because people are busy, they're sick of hearing about it, they're irritated. Why don't you just get over yourself? And the reality is, if people could, they would. If they could, they would. But the tough love attitude can sometimes just stomp on somebody so hard that it causes someone to shut down. And I haven't seen ChatGPT do that. It's just encouraging. Yeah.
Yes. I think that this is part of what I would call like a collaborative model in therapy. So I've had people put in maybe they have years worth of journal entries and they put that in, and then let's look at the themes. So maybe ChatGPT will highlight the themes and the issues that it finds from like hundreds of pages of journal entries. And that's a really efficient and effective collaborative use. And they bring that in and we work on these themes together. And we might prompt GPT to say, what do you think are the patterns that I find myself stuck in? What are the things that, and so this is a very good use where I can be like, oh, let's analyze all these hundreds of pages and figure out what the themes are. And then we'll work on it together in therapy.
Oh, lovely. Yeah. If you're listening, this is a great way. If you've got piles of journals, you could mine them just like you could mine business documents. Are you using LLM to do that, or just general ChatGPT, or
both, but dependent on what people are trying to look for. Yes, I think that can be I think collaborative is the path forward, because we can use this information and use it to really enhance the type of therapy that goes on.
Do you worry about data privacy, or this stuff goes off my deepest inner thoughts? I know in one you mentioned GDPR and people are a bit twitchy about privacy.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts around that?
I think that is really important to know that most of these models, these platforms are not HIPAA compliant. There are some that are HIPAA compliant. So HIPAA is a regulation in the States which protects the confidentiality of our health information, because now there's so much that is remembered and how much data is stored. I think that is important to remember, that this information you're feeding the model actually it's remembered, it's stored, it's not protected.
It doesn't actually write it to a hard drive, but it does know the probabilistic model. You asked about this, so next time you're probably still dealing with what? It thinks in a different way than what we usually think of saving to a hard drive. Like, all my journal entries are saved to the hard drive. But yeah, I think that's interesting that all these privacy issues are coming up, and it's just things are moving so fast. And Dr. Wei, if we talk about AI as how it's affecting humans in general, yes, it can be used as a tool for therapy. What do you think is going to happen to us in the way we engage, the way we work, the way we parent, because this is everywhere. AI is like oxygen. There's no one area that it's not affecting in some way. And I think right now people are feeling a lot of stress just from the AI, like either trying to adapt it or trying to learn it, or my job is going to be redesigned, or the money system's going to be affected, politics, social media. And people are just like this. Are you seeing an increase in stress overall because of this new stuff that's coming into people's lives?
Definitely. Even when I talk about AI therapy on LinkedIn, they're like little fights that break out in the comments, and I don't even realize. I'm like, oh wow, this person's really anti-AI. And I think I try to be welcoming of all perspectives. I am very open to all these perspectives. This is actively forming in our field. And so I think that I think that it does touch upon people's concerns. Are they trained so many years, right? So many years to have this
I saw
job,
people
and
with
now,
PhD after their names getting all riled up. I'm like, relax.
Yeah, I get that. I get that. I myself have felt like, oh, wow, like I trained all these years for this thing. But also, I want to be realistic and be like, this is something that I need to understand. I need to understand how we can use it for our patients, for our clients, to their benefit. And then if it turns out that I have to learn to adapt. This is part of the whole structure, is we're always adapting to a new ecosystem.
Everybody's secretly wondering the same question. Am I going to lose my job? But part of us knows that our jobs are changing. So what I love about this, at least in the therapy world and maybe in the coaching world as well, is that you'll be able to serve more people deeper because some of the other work can be done through the bot, through ChatGPT. So you might spend more of your time, the relational aspects of eyeball to eyeball. At least on Zoom, you see a human, so that it's carbon to carbon, like animals, instead of carbon to silicone, which is not natural. And I think that's the concern. What happens to humans when we don't engage with humans? We're engaging with this thing with artificial empathy and artificial intelligence, and it's giving me advice. And
yeah, it could change and shape our expectations. That's what we don't know right now, because we don't know the long-term impacts. All these studies are like 8 weeks. They're not really a few months. Like, they're not like, we don't know a couple of years out what it's like if I've been working primarily only with an AI therapist. Like, we don't, or even just working primarily looking for guidance from AI. Does that change our friendships? Does it change our social life? Our expectations of how people show up for us different if we continue to have something that gives us very positive, always available advice? I don't know, but I don't think I'm so dystopic to think that it will eliminate our need for social human friendships. I think that there's a select group of people who may go that route, but I think that it's very innate to us for wanting kind of social companionship.
Exactly. And that's why, that's why the show is called All Things Human, like our human experience. What does it mean to be human when we don't have to know anything anymore? This is what I'm going to be exploring with more guests, is the nature of work. Like, we know that our jobs will be changing. The standard is a lot of the rote tasks will be offloaded to the bot, which is lovely. We hate that stuff, so that we can do more of the human stuff. The question becomes, what does that mean? What would a job feel like if you weren't constantly writing emails and da? And, it would be like, would work have to feel tedious? What would happen if you had to show up for work with nothing to do? Because if everything that is done by the bot, why are you there? Well, you're there for like
purpose,
brainstorming, leading people. And so that means work might actually be enjoyable, because you're not like, and then there's a part of me that goes, oh, all these graduate programs have, what the standard leadership is that you have to manage people. You got to have a carrot, you got to have a stick, and you got to pay for a performance, like all that stuff. That sort of goes away. If the machines are doing, machines are doing the work, they're the doers. What are you paid for? And what I'm trying to build a case for is, you will get more out of your people if you let them. Right now, what happens is people go, oh, I can reduce my work staff by 50%, 60%. But what means is the people who are left are just as busy as they ever were. They're just managing more AI agents and this and that. But the promise of AI is people having enough time and space and emotional stability to do the next level. So if you can hang in there and keep your people less busy, I believe.
Oh, this makes total sense. I was just talking to a friend about this who's in IT, and actually, and also his partner is also in the same department. And we were talking about how if you don't get on board with AI at this point and then figure out what to do with the extra time that it creates, then you are at risk.
Well, then
because everybody else is working with it and figuring out what to do with their additional
and they're racing
time
to the bottom. How many people can you cut? And then the people who are left are just as busy as ever. They're just managing more AI agents, that you can do a lot more business with fewer people, which is fine. But my thought is, if you really wanted the benefit of AI as creativity and this higher level thinking, it happens when people are relaxed. Wouldn't you agree? Like, you have to have enough.
You have to make connections. Yes, strategy is a huge, you can't do strategy if you're bogged down.
Exactly. Then you can get amazing, like new stuff. But there's this period of, okay, if I can run, let's say I can run my business with, instead of 100 employees, I only need 50 versus, and it's a continuum, or versus, how do I say this? There's an equation, it's like a calculus. At some point, if you hold on to people, you will actually make more than if you had reduced the staff. Like, will you make
Oh,
more?
I see what you're
Cutting
saying.
people and saving on payroll, and the company is outrageously profitable, or hanging on to people and growing with human skills that the bots can't do. You
Mm,
make more in the second area than the first. And
mm,
now that we don't know, there's not enough data yet. But
yeah,
I believe business in the long run needs to go this way.
I
And if
see.
we go
Yes.
this way, that means work is not work. It's not
Mhm.
unpleasant.
Yes, I think that model is consistent with rather than AI replacement, really AI augmentation. So that I think that in that more of a collaborative, human-centered
Correct.
model.
And that means you'd show up and not have much to do except talk to people, brainstorm, what if. That's what is being called the human-centric workplace. But
Mm,
right now, it is such a leap for leaders to grasp that. They're looking at, this is my impression, AI will save me money so I can make more. Yes, it will. But you're missing out, I think, on the human factor. If you hold on people, and the key is you have to let them, meaning nothing to do.
mhm,
All this stuff that requires calm, space, creativity, relationship, then the business can go even faster. But it's
mhm.
hard to explain to people. What do you think?
I think that makes a lot of sense. And I think it will probably select for, I often see people who get at work a lot of different kind of workplace psychological testing to find out what different domains they're excelling in. And so I think this would probably select for people who are more on the creative side and more innovative, because I think there are probably people when given that chance to strategize, to think outside the box, who will use that time in a way
Mhm.
that's very impactful and imaginative, but there are probably also people who would not necessarily know what to do
Yeah.
with that
They
time.
would
So it'll
just sit
probably
there
select
like,
for the group that would.
and oh, I did a lot of research in chat for hours, and leadership would change because then it's, how do you pay for performance? Do we still need that model? Because how do you measure creativity? How do you measure relationship? It's not measurable, but
Mm.
just because it's not measurable doesn't mean it's not very important.
Hmm.
And so it's more difficult to manage people in this new model that's much more about being human instead of human doing. Right now, we're measured on productivity. Like, we're measured, how much did you sell? X, which is what we've done for many,
Mm.
a long time. In this new model, what the heck are we measuring? And there are going to be freeloaders that just sit around and do nothing. Like, is that
Yeah,
true? I don't know. So these are some of the ideas I've been exploring with some
yeah,
leaders.
that's
Because
fascinating.
if we're going to get the gains from what you're talking about, like AI to really free us to the next
Hmm.
level, the thing that has to happen is you have to let people have the space to do that. If it's all a
Mm.
race to the bottom to reduce
Yeah,
staff so you can make money, nobody has a chance to see the benefit of that freedom
yeah.
because we're busy as
It,
ever.
and how long do you, one, how do you measure those outcomes? And two, how long do you give people to create those outcomes?
That's
I
way
think
over
those are
my
big
pay
questions.
grade.
Yeah.
But it's exciting to think that people could be freed up to be human again at work. Because right now, people are more human outside of work, with your friends, and then you go to work and you're doing. At
Yeah.
least that's been my
Yeah.
experience.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that we don't know what that will look like yet, but it is more exciting if there could be some companies who have perhaps like a willingness and an openness to see what happens and give people that space.
Yeah, or maybe it's, I don't know. I've tried to play with the calculus of all this. If you go from 100 people to 50, what if you went down to 75 and kept 25 on to, would your money go up? I'm sure there's some
Mm,
grand calculus somewhere of the
yes,
optimal balance of things.
yes.
So this has been so amazing. We could talk for hours. I'm definitely going to have you back again because there's a
Thank you for
series, and I'm just, by the way, I never had a chance to read the rest of your bio. My gosh, the reason why I loved talking to you is that you're not just a doctor, you're also an artist. You have this digital AI. How do you
yes.
tell us about this thing that you created?
That's how I actually got into this in the first place. It was a very personal story, which was just that I had a parent who was very ill at the time. He's okay now. But I wanted to think about how do we preserve people's memories? And at the time, it was around 2017, 2018, I started looking into methods that we can preserve our memories, and AI came up as a natural result of being able to create perhaps like a digital twin of ourselves or an AI clone. And that was how I started my journey into this and trying to understand how do we use all this data that we create, because we leave so much digital data behind. And so I've lost some friends, and I've realized they leave so much of this data behind. And so I was trying to figure out, how do we remember them? Could we create a version of them to remember them? As I went through this process though, and I created a play, and then we did a lot of interviews of like hundreds of people on how they felt about digital clones of themselves or having digital clones of other people. And I learned a lot about grief in terms of how we remember people, the space, a digital space could be used for that. But I leave the project kind of feeling like I'm not so sure that will answer what we need when we lose someone. I don't know having a digital version of someone when they're gone will answer some of our questions and the emotional grief that's left behind. I don't think so. And that maybe goes to your question of what makes us human, right? There's something about that we
Grief
just
is a
missed the human
profoundly
person.
human experience.
Yeah.
And I know people are doing all kinds of digital things to help, whether it's, people's Facebook pages or whatever, or saving people's voice messages. I get it. And I don't know. I don't know. It's part of being human. But I just thought that was worth mentioning. So I'll put that in the show notes if everyone wants to go and explore all this creativity with your digital footprint, your digital persona. And you also have a newsletter that I signed up for. What was it called? The Psychology of AI. Yes. And my goodness, you're also a Yale educated lawyer. Pretty amazing. Okay, we could be talking all day. So I'm going to close right now so I don't talk your ear off. But thank you so much for
Thank
your
you for
thoughts.
having me.
I think people are going to get a lot out of this. This is the topic of the day. And I'm going deep in this with different guests, different points of view, and we'll be circling back around because we're all learning at the same time. So next year at this time, we'll have a very different understanding of what's going on, and it's moving at light speed. Wouldn't you agree?
Yes, yes.
I can't even keep up. Like, how many releases of ChatGPT are we on now?
Thank you so much for having me.
Okay,
It's been a
talk to you
pleasure.
soon. Bye.